Welcome, Minaj, to the podcast on the Data Professor YouTube channel. So let's begin by a brief introduction about yourself. Would you like to tell us about you?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Janine. My name is Minhaj, and I'm the CEO of a company called Psyda, which is an acronym for Psychometric Data Analysis. Psychometrics come from a branch of psychology where you use statistical analysis on the data that you've collected through for the psychological analysis. And we do use AI in both academic and industrial solutions. We create behavioral pipelines for companies about understanding their customers, their behavior on their platforms like website or mobile apps. And we also do a lot of research work into finding new markets for their products and services.
All right, awesome. And could you share with us like your background, your educational background? What field did you study, and how did you get into psychometrics?
So it's a very interesting one, actually. It's kind of an intersection between multiple fields. I studied it for an MBA, and then I moved on towards more of personality psychology and a business psychology background. That's in terms of human resources and recruitment. And then my coursework and PhD was also geared towards behavioral psychology. And through the years, I have learned that, and these principles can also be applied to the business settings where you want to make sense of data that is being generated by customers on websites of clients. So big companies like Amazon or Google or Facebook, they're basically data companies. So they hire data scientists to make sense of the data and what consumers of their data or service products are doing on their website, and based on that they can serve them the right ads. So I'm currently going through my PhD in management, general business management, and focusing on personality psychology and its implication towards business and education. I also serve as a visiting professor here at the university in a business school. I teach courses in psychology, business communication, and international culture. Moreover, I do a podcast that I've had the pleasure
Mhm.
to have you on that also, where I invite brilliant people around the world to talk about topics like AI, data science, and psychology. And That's a bit of my background.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. And it's a big pleasure having you on the show today. And so, like in our previous collaboration video, you generously provided some insight into how psychology could be used for data science. And so, like, how did you get data science to be integrated into your research in psychometrics?
It's a very good question because data science, the good part of it is that it's a very multidisciplinary field. So you don't have to
Hmm.
come from a certain computer science background or a physics or a mathematics background, unlike popular belief. The good part is that you can use those principles in data science to almost any field that you're researching in. And it's sad that the social science usage of principles of data science have not yet been matured. And actually, the principles of neural networks came from psychology itself, or neuroscience, let's put it that way, so where you actually have a neuron that is connected through synapses to other neurons. And that became the part of forward and backward pass in neural networks. Unfortunately, and social sciences is not very well equipped with the tools that are required for data science.
Mm.
That thankfully people like you are making tutorials about how to use Jupyter notebooks or in R to do programming, how to deploy apps and things like this. Unfortunately, this is not what people study in social science programs. So what I did was, I was an early adopter of technology from the beginning. So I learned to code myself. I learned to design website in HTML using other software, do some graphic designing, do some programming. So I was uniquely suited for bring technological tools into social sciences. And then I thought that what could be the better way to actually use data science to augment the understanding of business principles. So I went to a very good business school in Sweden where we studied a lot about how good products can be positioned in a way that people would adapt them faster than the other products. So let me give you an example.
Mm.
98% of Facebook's revenue come from
Mm.
ads. 84% of Twitter's revenue come from ads. 82% of Google's revenue comes from ads. And that's very counterintuitive, because you would think that, it's a social media company, or it's a company that gives you Google or Google Drive and a lot of other products. So most of these, the revenue should come from these products, but that's not true. They're making most of their money through ad revenue. And that gets you thinking, that why is that these companies are making more money off of revenues than they would actually make it from the product.
Mm.
And if you look at the data science, there are two components of any architecture. One is the code itself, so the engineers build the code pipelines and they deploy apps, and the other is the user generated data that you would be analyzing through that code, or infrastructure for that. Now the code part is done very well by the engineers and the data scientists, but without data you actually don't have anything to analyze. And the money part, or let's say the business ROI, is actually in the data part and not the engineering part, because you can build a great product, but unless you're able
Mm.
to market it and sell it to the right people, it's never going to get enough eyeballs, so that never they won't get to an adoption stage where they're going to be earning money off of their products. So think about your own drug discovery product. So if you are at some point able to discover a drug that's going to change a lot of people's life, unless it's set out by a huge company with the marketing campaigns and taking it to the regions where they will be most useful,
Mm.
it's not going to be very helpful. So that's where the work of my company comes in. So what we try to do is that we try to understand the data and the pattern within an organization. So for example, let's talk about the metrics that would actually help companies generate ROI at a rapid scale. So I had a pleasure to interview Luis Serrano, who's worked at Google, and we talked a little bit about how Google actually does that, um, how does it actually create revenue, ad revenues from the data that it already has. So he was working on a YouTube team, and the key metric to optimize was the view time of the videos. And now I intuitively think that why would people want to watch more videos? Because we generally think, if you watch more videos, then it's kind of a free exchange. There's no exchange. But turns out that if you optimize the view time more, and you increase them, people are generally more likely to click on ads. And then when they
Mm.
click on ads, they have more chances to actually purchase new stuff. Now, one of the other things is that you've heard lately that Apple has now given option to its U.S. customers to buy the products but pay them later. And
Mm.
this is actually honing on a human bias, which is to shop till you drop. And you can, if you can pay later, why pay now? So people generally
Right.
buy products, and then they have to pay, and then on top of that, if you're not able to make payments, they're going to be paying it with interest. And that's something that companies in the end generally profit from. Not that I recommend that, but
Mm.
certainly companies want people to get into these programs. So the result of all these observation is that if you can create a system where you optimize the metrics, where people consume your product or services more, eventually you're going to get to a point where your user base is large enough that it will give you insights into what kind of incentive you should provide them at what point. So if you deliver them more targeted ads, then they're going to more likely give you the revenue, and you can take a share of that revenue as well. So that's generate the model. And what we try to do is that we try to use different tools like Snowplow and
Mm.
other similar tools to create those behavioral pipelines, and then give these unique insights to actually act for the companies, and then they can find out that the results from their baseline is immensely improved and through our services. And that's generally what we do.
Right. Yeah, that's a very interesting insight. And like, yeah, like for the outsider, I mean, we would believe that most of the revenue would probably come from the services that they do provide. And it's a big eye opener to hear that it's actually coming from the advertisement. So is it kind of like, I don't know, like would the services that they create, would that pretty much drive more audience onto the platform? And then that would then in turn drive more, I don't know, like advertisement in order to get the eyeballs as well. Is it
Yeah, I
correct
think
to assume that?
it's a bit, yes. I mean, I get your question. I think it's a bit of a egg and the chicken questions, which came
Right,
first.
right.
But it kind of works both ways, because once you're starting a new venture, you want more people to
Mm,
get your services. You're going to give them free trials, you incentivize them, you're going to give
Mm.
them free codes, and two for three, three for two, and things like this. These packages
Mm.
so that you can have more people coming to your product and services. Now scale this to the level where Facebook and Google is now. So they have immense amount of information throughout the globe, about 1 billion people using them every day. And when these billion people use their platforms, they leave their digital traces and digital dust of their lives, so that they can
Mhm.
actually pick up. And this is why, if you look at the data scientist salaries on Glassdoor, so they're making 2 times more than an average person in US would. So $50,000-$60,000 for an average person in US. They're starting a decent data scientist will start from
Mm.
150, somewhere.
Mm.
And there must be a reason why they're that highly paid in comparison with other people. And that this is exactly the reason that they're going to find the insights that
Mm.
are so valuable that it's going to generate millions and billions in business for Facebook, so that money is kind of peanuts for them. And one of the great things with all this process is that, when this process is disrupted, they are going to
Mhm.
come back with extreme vengeance. So if you know about this new spite between Facebook and Apple. So what Apple basically does is that, it gives now an option to people to stop allowing the tracking of the apps on
Mhm.
iPhones and their other platforms. And once you do that, Facebook trackers cannot actually track the information of people who are using Facebook on Apple's platform. And that has created a huge fuss because Facebook wants this to be reverted, and they're creating new
Mm.
platforms. Mark Zuckerberg actually went out and said that this is unfair, and they're probably planning some litigation also. But for our point, what's important is that if that's such a big thing, why is that it's bothering Facebook so much? Because their business depends on that. 98% of the
Right.
ads revenue is makes
Mm.
up the portfolio of Facebook.
Mm.
And the idea is that at some point, Facebook becomes so good that not only it tracks the consumer behavior on their website, they also take it from the other platforms. For example, one of the ways that you can find out what people are looking for off platform on Facebook is that you can add a code called Facebook Pixel on different
Mhm.
websites. And when you're scrolling those websites, the pixel is actually tracking which products you've been looking on, how longer did you stay on those product pages, and did you write a review, and your date of birth, if there's a birthday coming on, what zip code you're from, what is your education level, and then it saves all this information. And when you're back on Facebook, it actually furnishes you the ad for the product that you were actually looking 5 minutes ago. And this
Wow.
cross-platform collaboration is something that gives people exactly the kind of product that they were looking for, and that is
Okay.
most likely to result in sales. Now, the
Mm.
psychological process is way too complex for normal people to understand. That okay, it could be the fact that I was looking for a shoe, and now I see the shoe, and as long as I have the shoes that I'm looking for, who cares where it comes from? But you think it from a company's perspective. Once you set it properly, you have data scientists who give you the insights. That is going to result in millions and millions of dollars, just if you could set up the right pipelines and read the data right, and give them the feedback that okay, now this customer is more likely to buy this, so furnish the ads to them. And from a consumer's perspective, there is no way that Facebook would actually make 98% of the revenue unless
Mhm.
they were so good at that. Which means that if I'm looking for something, unless I see exactly the kind of ad that I'm looking for, I would most likely skip over that. And if I were to skip over that, then the Facebook's return on investment on furnishing those ads to me wouldn't be that much. And if they're making so much money, that means that it certainly is so good. And how it becomes so good is that over time, the models learn from
Mm.
interactions between people around the globe, and find out the best people who are actually going to be liking that product or commenting on that post. So, for example, if you want to start up a Facebook ad, it's going to give you two or
Mhm.
three metrics that you want to select from. So you want more likes on a page, you want to have more engagement as in comments, or you want the post to be shared, or you want people to
Mhm.
send you messages, or you want to send people to another website outside the Facebook. And based on
Right.
that, they give you different price ranges that you would have to pay for each campaign.
Mm.
And unless Facebook is 100% confident that they're going to get them the right kind of customer that they're looking for, they won't be doing that. And since they're doing that and they're so good at that, they're making so much money that it's unbelievable. And I'm surprised, people think that, I'm talking about and reading other people's mind, and it's some kind of voodoo magic. It's not. Research has been around for 10 to 15 years at least, and I'm simply applying that to data, using data science, and it's doing wonders. So I think it's time that we started also looking at the patterns in data from a social science perspective, as well as engineering one.
Right. Yeah, that's a big eye opener. And like those kind of tracking technology. I mean, there are kind of measures, right? Like for example, if people are using like VPNs, or if they're using like search engines such as DuckDuckGo, which doesn't track anything. What is the general percentage of people who don't use it? Do you have a rough estimate?
Okay, so what we know from the fact is that the people who are going to be using VPNs or DuckDuckGo, they certainly
Mm-hmm.
have the usage pattern as well. So it's not like that if they're coming for example, if you're from Thailand but you're visiting an Amazon US website from a Chinese server, and Amazon is
Mm-hmm.
noticing that you're coming from a Chinese server, it's not going to immediately take you and put the in data set, and the data set starts becoming corrupt. What it's going to do is that, what are you going to do over time? What are your shipping? What is your shipping address? Who are the people that
Mm-hmm.
you're sending this to? And what is your usage pattern, and what is the time of your usage? For example, if you're using it at 3 in the morning in Amazon time, they know for sure that you're not from US, and especially when you're doing it all the time, like in weekdays. So you become a suspect. So what they do is that they create some alert, and it's called the red flags. And once you have red flags, and they put you in a separate bucket where they test
Mm-hmm.
if the hypothesis that you are not from US is correct or not. And over time, they will have this hypothesis. One more technique that they do is that when they do the data science projects within these bigger companies, they first do it on batch data, and then after that they do it on streaming data. So what happens in batch data is that when you're cleaning and transforming your data, these people are more likely to be in outlier section. So if you make a bell curve, so these people are going to be
Mm-hmm.
at the extreme ends. People are
Mm-hmm.
going to be using DuckDuckGo, or they're being highlighted as a red flag, or people
Mm-hmm.
who are using a VPN, and their behavior pattern matches a specific country. So these people are already going to be in that bucket, so then will not be part of the analysis. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a small percentage of the whole bell curve, and that does not
Mm-hmm.
actually mess up the bigger behavior pattern. And this is why, I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
can try that. This is a wonderful exercise, and an interactive one. So on YouTube, just go and change the country that you're from,
Right.
and then once you do this, you will notice that it's still going to give you the recommendations for the channels that you're subscribed to, or the videos that you've seen from your own country. Because even though that you've changed the country, your account is the same, and your
Right.
viewing history remains the same. So if you were to clean it and then just remove the other place, it still won't help, because your email address is the same. So your email
Mm-hmm.
address holds the key for every interaction that you will actually make. I mean, and it's also possible that you have actually moved to another country, but when you move from another country, you're going to be part of the whole population who's going to be using the same ISP or the same neighborhood or the same Wi-Fi, and then it's easier to understand. Okay, this person is not really in that country, and if you're staying there for 6 months longer or 9 months longer or whatever their internal YouTube metrics is, then they're going to
Mm-hmm.
start changing their recommendations based on how long you live. But on a theoretical level, it's very, very hard to dodge these systems. I mean, there are
Mm-hmm.
ways, but I'm not going to talk about that on the video.
All right. That's awesome. Yeah. And like based on your research, do you have any recommendations like in terms of data driven for YouTube? Like what constitutes like a viral video, or how could, like data science be used to figure out like a way to pretty much, kind of like create a viral video based on all of the available data? Do you have the secret sauce for that?
That's very interesting. I mean, it seems like these days appearing on TikTok is probably a better chance than having a YouTube viral video. But it really depends on your niche. For example, if
Right.
you make data science videos, your video can go viral, but it has better chance of going viral if it's a funny meme, or it's a cat video or things like this. Because you look at the societal bell curve. I mean, what are the things
Right.
that people are more interested in? And that's probably where personality psychology comes in. So before I give you a practical example of how you classify the global audiences and their patterns, let's talk about what differentiates their interests. So what are the differences between you and me? It could be skin color, it could be eyes, it could be bone structure, it could be height, weight, fat ratio, and things like this. And these are the genotypical difference. And then we have the phenotypical differences that are resulted resulting by the environment. So the kind of food that I like, it might be different for you. The kind of sports that I enjoy will be different from us. The kind of environment that we have grown in certainly is very different, and that also creates something called temperament. It was very popular, at least in the Middle Ages, with the Christian mythology and medicine, and they still actually use it for different kind of counseling. But that certainly has a component in how personalities develop. So, but the scientific research has actually moved forward, and there's a consensus that the Big Five model of personality is the most scientifically valid and acceptable personality model that is being used both in academics and industry these days. So I had the pleasure to talk
Hmm.
to the scientist at Hogan's, which is the world's largest company for personality assessments. And if you don't know, they're Fortune 500 companies. 80% of those companies do not hire employees anymore unless they have these
Hmm.
kind of temperamental tests to find out if your job is matching with your natural personality inclinations. And if it doesn't, then it's probably no use hiring these people and spending a lot of money to train them, only to find out that they have left for 3 or 4 months. And that has given a huge breakthrough in turnover rates that were quite high before people actually use this test. And the comparative assessment of the companies who actually use these tests and companies who don't use these tests, it's very clear that companies who actually are very thoughtful in their hiring processes generally have happier, more satisfying and productive employees. Now, what are these differences? So the
Hmm.
differences, there are five big domains that scientists have found out differentiate people from each other. For the first one is the openness to experience, which means that people are generally open to new ideas, new foods, new travels, new people, new cultures, and it's also a spectrum. It's not like black and white. You either are open or you're not. So it's not kind of a binary verdict. So on a spectrum, people who are more likely to be open to new ideas tend to score high on the openness dimension, and people who are more conservative tend to be on the lower side of this dimension. The second one is conscientiousness, which is the ability to persevere in your work, doing it regularly, doing it every day, and you do it, and you what you call that, you have the grit in your work.
Great. Hmm.
And then you have extroversion, um, which is your tendency to interact with other people, going out, meeting people. You're a fan of hanging out, going to different countries, traveling. So you recharge yourself when you meet people. On the other end of the spectrum are introverts, who find extreme pleasure in reading books and doing activities that you can do on your spare time or alone time, and they drain themselves when they actually talk to people. That they do like to talk to people. It's not like they don't. It's just like they recharge when they're alone and where you're thinking and they're making sense of the world. Now, the fourth dimension is agreeableness, which is your tendency to sacrifice yourself for other people's needs. So people who are extremely um, helpful to society. Let's talk about Martin Luther King, or um, Gandhi, or people like this, who have sacrificed themselves for the good of other people. And on the other spectrum, so we have people who are extremely individualistic and career and success oriented. And then finally, we have narcissism, which should actually be called emotional stability, but because the name kind of suggests that there's something wrong with you, but there's nothing wrong. It's just like some people are more they react more on negative
Hmm.
news in comparison to other people. Other people are nonchalant about what's going to happen and say, okay, we'll see when things are going to actually happen. So far nothing's happened. But other people, they're more reactive and they're more scared about what's going to happen. So it comes kind of from the insecurity. So these are the big five domains that people differ from each other. And when these people differ from each other, that certainly has its expression in the society. So this is why most people who are working in academics, they tend to be very
Hmm.
high in the trade openness, because they want to explore things, they want to do research, they want to find new ways of doing things, they question the traditions and methods, and procedures and history and everything that they can find out, and they always see a improve the way that things can be improved. On the other hand, of the conservatives, which think that, that if things are working fine for centuries, then there's probably no reason why people should actually think differently or act differently. Anything that's a novelty for them is kind of a threat to their current life in the structure that they have built. And think of the agreeableness. And some people tend
Hmm.
to bend over backwards to help others. I think of it
Hmm.
like Eastern or Western cultures. So Western
Hmm.
cultures are generally known for being more individual, while Eastern cultures are more towards spirituality and kindness and agreeableness and sacrificing yourself and saving face. We have this culture dimensions by Hofstede. It's a very good framework to analyze that. On the conscientious front end, people who are more conservative tend to work hard, without actually thinking. They have this grit and do it over and over. I mean, not that people who are open don't do that, but generally it's their forte. They have the work ethic and grit to do that. Then we have agreeables. We already talked about that. That people who tend to sacrifice more of their personal lives for the others. We could think of nurses and doctors, and generally people from kindergarten. These are the kind of people who go out and help people and do people-oriented jobs. And then we
Hmm.
finally have the emotional stability. People who tend to be more emotionally nonchalant, they perform well in situations which are highly charged, which would make other normal people quite upset. But for them, it's kind of okay. So it's a good thing that if you have a higher uncertainty uh,
Hmm.
position for a job that doesn't have defined rules, and nothing is clear in black and white, then these people will generally do very good in this. And I want to talk about people. If you want to go viral, then you have to understand all these differences among people. And generally, a huge population of any country, there are certainly cultural differences, but generally
Hmm.
a huge population of people will be interested in food, gadgets, and music, and things like this. And these are the videos. If you look on the YouTube, and if you rank ordered the people with highest viewership, you would find the channels with food, and cars, and music videos, and movie trailers, IMDb, and things like that. They would have the highest kind of the viewership. But when it comes
Hmm.
to topics about education or deep conversations, for example, data science might not be a very popular video among people who are under 18, and they have different interests, or they're children, they're teenagers. And then also depends on what kind of majors that they're studying in the university or college. And then that would make or kind of narrow down your options of people who among who you would want to become viral. So you don't want to become
Hmm.
viral among kids. You want to become viral among other engineers or data scientists or machine learning researchers and things like this. So
Hmm.
with that said, there are certainly some ways in which you can position yourself as someone who has the deep knowledge that a lot of other people need around the world. And when you talk about those strategies, what you have to do is that internet is a global phenomenon. It's not a Western centric phenomenon. Or I'm pretty sure that a lot of your viewers are outside Thailand or even Southeast Asia, and many of those would be in Europe or US,
Hmm.
Australia, New Zealand. And the fact is, what you can deduce from that is that you never know what kind of people would be interested in your product. So if you were to make a paid promotion of your videos, you would most likely remove the territorial restriction on Facebook ads, and leave it
Hmm.
for the worldwide. And when you do that, over time you'll start finding out what are the regions where your videos are being picked up very fast. So what are the regions where you're getting subscribers from fast? And it will also emerge from your discussions and Twitter or YouTube or Facebook, and the comment section in the YouTube, where you find out most people are coming from. And based on that, you kind of target that, and then you do some kind of A/B testing and see, okay, if I were to promote
Mhm.
more aggressively in that region, what would the results be? And if I were to do the opposite, what would the results be? So it's kind of an iterative
Mm.
process to find out how you do
Right.
that. For big
Mhm.
companies, it's kind of easier because it's free for them. But for
Mhm.
other people, they have to do this trial method. But certainly, I'm no
Mhm.
expert on how to make a viral video, or I would have done that.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, like based on what you're saying, like based on the personality, based on the, like the regionality that they're coming from, I mean, it's kind of like we could perform some sort of like audience segmentation, right? Kind of like in industry, they would have like customer segmentation, and so they would probably create like promotions for a particular group to tailor their needs, right? So probably, as you have mentioned, like the age group, like working age, or how about like which country they are coming from, and if we're able to target their specific needs, then it would probably hit home more than a random video which did not have any preparations for that. Okay, yeah, that's
Exactly.
pretty.
If you look
Mm,
at the big companies, for example, McDonald's or KFC or Subway, I mean, they're a global phenomenon now. So you can find
right.
Starbucks from anywhere in Malaysia to Puerto Rico,
Mm,
Colombia, Africa, everywhere. And the reason why they've so successful have been so successful in setting up shop there and
mm,
maintain their audience is the fact that they mold themselves to the geography that they're actually operating in. So this is why one of the challenging case studies at our business schools were to find out the best possible business environment for a company that's trying to move to a new geography, because you have to deal with a lot of things like regulatory environment, the barriers to entry, the kind of cultural acceptance, the regulations, taxes, and
mm,
it makes it so complicated that you certainly have to have some kind of analytics or an expat Delphi panel to tell you that what would be the necessary minimum requirements for you to get to this market. And this is why it's very important that when you're making these kind of metrics, make sure that you do some kind of changes based on different geographies. So if you're
mm.
focusing on a certain group, then make sure that you're tailoring your advertisement to their specific needs, and that's going to yield probably the best results.
Nice. Yeah. And I was wondering, like, have you taken those data and then building up a model in order to make prediction or classification?
Yes, I might not be able to talk too much in detail about that because of my NDAs. Because, but for the companies, I can tell you a general idea is that
Right.
when you go to a company, you actually see their architecture, what they're using at the moment. So the first
Mm,
step is whenever you go to a company, you kind of make a baseline for what they're doing at the moment. So you kind of document their procedures. You see how mature their data pipeline is. Are they simply on an on-prem server? What kind of data do they currently have? How much do they have? Are they
mm,
planning to move on cloud or not? What kind of cloud architecture they would want to have if they ever did? What kind of security guidelines they have? And then you try to understand their business. So what they do is that you kind of do some kind of Maslow hierarchy analysis and see,
mm,
okay, what kind of product are you selling? So let's example, you're selling bread, like for food. Now, if you're selling bread, your market is kind of very niche because bread is not something that you can export to rest of the world because of its expiry dates and import export costs, and a million other reasons. So you would likely to be selling within a country, or let's say at max to your neighbors, and that comes at the lowest level of Maslow hierarchy. This is a product that people are going to be consuming every single day of their lives. So the market is huge, and you might have some competitors also, and then you have to analyze what kind of competitors are you dealing with and what is your edge over them. Could it be manufacturing, could it be brand name, could it be the more marketing resources that you have? And then once you identify that, you kind of make a skeleton structure of how do you actually use the data that you currently have in order to predict or do a simulation of what resources would you require to be better than your competitor in that specific market. And if you don't have that, you have to build that infrastructure working with that company to find out the data that you absolutely need in order to be able to predict that timeline after which you would be able to actually make decisions based on facts. Because a lot of companies and startups, what happens that, and we work with a lot of startups and help them, give them a good structure upon which they can actually build. And once we have the information enough to be able to guide them, we do that. But if you don't have that, what you have to do is that you have to first create a platform on which you can build data driven decisions. Because unless you have some data to base your decision on, anything
Hmm.
else would be anyone's calls. I mean, your CEO would want to go in one direction, your CTO want to go in another direction. There's always kind of a rift between engineering and management sides, because engineering wants to make a great product. The management side knows that it's not going to sell very easily, and there are other ways in which we can make quick buck, and that's kind of a
Hmm.
compromise. So it kind of goes into the more of a business oriented problems than engineering side at some point. But once you're done with this and you move forward, let's talk about the medium size or the large size or entities or corporations. So what they have humongous data available already at their hands. So they have well built engineering teams. They have the CI/CD pipelines. They have different kind of analytics teams that you can actually see the picture that's being built over the years. So what you do is then you try to find out the kind of crucial information which is the missing piece of the puzzle. And what you do is at that point, you're going to create the behavioral pipelines. Out of all the companies that we have worked, I have yet to see any company which had a pretty sophisticated behavioral pipeline. And that was kind of the missing part in a lot of these companies. For example, YouTube, Amazon, Facebook, like I told, I have had guests from these companies talk on my show, and I know for sure that since they are data companies, they are making money off of the ads revenue. They certainly
Hmm.
have these people who do it for you. For other companies, they don't realize it, or let's say they don't have the necessary unique skill that our company has, which is to reverse engineering the whole process and to find
Hmm.
out that how do they actually make sense of those metrics that they already have, and then optimize that for the growth. And that's where we come in. So what we do is that we take their data, make pipelines for that, and then we monitor it over time to see, if we still have those patterns. So one of the things that we talked about earlier is that if people are using VPN or
Hmm.
DuckDuckGo and put them in a specific bucket, and the rest of the people, how does that actually change over time? Do we actually have to use the time series forecasting using Profit or Arimax? Are there seasonal variances and things like this? And once you know for sure that these patterns are repeatable, and you are able to predict that. So what we do is that in financial industry, there's something called back testing. So what they do
Hmm.
is that they use algorithmic trading for finding out the optimal strategy of investing in a particular stock over time.
Hmm.
And once they know that it's profitable for about like a year or two of back testing, they actually put that into production. And that can also be done for the behavioral and social data also. That if your people are uh, reinforcingly repeating their patterns on a website or on a mobile app, then that certainly means that this is going to be the trend. And investing in the trend and riding the trend. I mean, in stock market, this is what they call the you ride the wave and going up.
Hmm.
And once you do this, you try to you find out that when you're riding the right wave, you're going to make millions on that, because now you know the trend. And this is why data scientists are one of the most invaluable resources, because they tell you about things that are going to happen before it actually happens. And once you have this valuable information, you can act upon that information and get a competitive advantage over your competitors, and that results in not only the market share but
Hmm.
also the increased profits.
Right. Yeah. So while you're explaining, I had this thought, like if we could hop onto the prior area where you talked about like the personality test. Um, Based on your experience, have companies used such data or information to determine the satisfaction of employees in terms of their engagement, in terms of their satisfaction or fulfillment in their job?
I think it's a very good question. I think the last time when we made a video on that topic, there were a lot of questions about, that I should make videos on the HR and the
Mm,
recruitment aspect of that. And my book also is about this topic, in which I talk about how these tests have been monumental for the recruitment. Now, the question of recruitment is a little more complicated than most people would want it to be, which is
mm,
like, unlike the data that people generate on website and mobile apps,
mhm,
that is kind of a behavior that's displayed when you're using a product. But when you're working in a
Mm.
company, it's a different thing. Now, there are two components of that. One is that pre-screening at the level of recruitment certainly has its benefits. You don't want to hire someone who's fit for a 100-meter Olympic for a job which is more of an accountant nature. So he cannot actually sit on a desk and work for the rest of his life, where he's actually meant to go out and, you know, be Usain Bolt. So what they do is that they try to find out based on their own answers. So what they do is that they have a questionnaire and with simple questions that they ask about their lives, their interests, their hobbies, their fears, their regrets. So they're very simple questions. So you can actually go out and take one of those tests online for free also. So what it does is that, over the years, these tests have generated multicultural, multi-country, multi-age, multi-gender results from hundreds and thousands of people around the world to substantiate its validity and reliability, to be certain in the fact that what it actually measures is displayed in expression of humans in their work life. So what it means that, if you hire someone in a leadership position based on their personality test, they're more likely to be excelling in their field in comparison to other people who weren't fit for that position. And that has been the
Mhm.
general observation throughout the history. And this is why this has been one of the most successful transition in business psychology. That, people are now being hired for on an objective metric ground and not based on personal favor. And when I was talking about this concept earlier, a lot of people thought that, that might be something that you cannot hire people based on your on a psychological test. But let's assume that it's wrong. What's the alternative? Well, the
Mm.
alternative is that, people are going to hire other people based on their personal whims, and that's more subjective than the other option, which is to have the objective um, assessment of their answer that they have themselves given on a test.
Mhm.
And based on that, it's not only that you hire people based on those tests, you also have to do some of their background checks, their previous experiences, their performances, their knowledge of the field, and other metrics also. For example, one of the things would be the IQ of that person
Mhm.
also, because IQ is a good predictor of, I think it's probably the best predictor of long-term life success, not
Mhm.
happiness as much as the success, because the ability for a person to succeed in their career depends a lot on the speed at which they grasp the knowledge which is related to their domain. And the big five personality test comes in and tells that if that's the domain that they actually would like to work in. And when you have these two pieces of the puzzle, then a lot of things actually fall into place. And it's not like that it's based on some random subjective analysis of personal personality. It's based on extremely replicated data over the years. The test has been
Mhm.
worked on for at least 70 or 80 years now. 1915, I mean, U.S. Army actually started working on those tests and perfected that to a point where now it's an industry standard. So when you're using these principles in workplaces, and once you've hired these people based on their IQ or their other tests and experiences, we generally find out that people are extremely satisfied with the position that they're working at. So if you have a natural temperament of for something and you're exactly doing that thing in your job, the more likely response for you in a um, employee satisfaction survey is that I'm loving my job. And we have found
Mhm.
out that people have these responses over time if they are hired through a process which is objectively fair. It's no guarantee, of course. People change, and things happen, and certain interests change, and people can actually, you know, pivot their roles, or they want to
Mm.
try something else in their life, or sometimes they simply want to have breaks. For women, it's probably pregnancy. They want to spend more time with their family and children, and that can change also. But from a baseline comparison, it's way better than nothing. So this is why not only it helps people have a more rewarding, happy, satisfying, and productive career. It's very good for their personal and mental health also, which has become a huge issue, especially in the pandemic time where
Right.
um, people are locked inside. So there's something called Zoom fatigue, and in
Mm.
general, more individualistic countries like Western world, it's becoming a huge thing. Divorces are happening within those COVID periods like crazy, and there've been suicide rate hike during the COVID-19 period. And I think only if you could actually use those measures in those contexts, not only the work life but also the personal life would deeply benefit from that.
Right. Yeah, it holds immense power. I mean, listening from your experience on personality, and like the implication that it has to offer, both in terms of business or in terms of HR, or even for personal growth as well, right? Like because um, like sometimes I would also like to read books for personal development, like Angela Duckworth's Grit book, or Atomic Habits as well. And so it's really interesting how all of these kind of like fit in. Like listening from you is like, okay, all of the ideas about personal development or about personality traits, it kind of makes sense now. Like how they're all integrated, and how we can, if we are able to use data driven insights from that, we could potentially find meaning in, I don't know, like sometimes such personality tests, it might even help us to get out of our rut, right? Like maybe we're stuck in a job that maybe we probably hate, or but then if the personality exam could somehow guide you to a profession that you would love, or have passion for, that you would otherwise not know of. I mean, that would be a very powerful tool.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that you might not know is that a lot of data scientists, they're unique people because it's kind of a unicorn person who is uniquely suited for a role like this, because it takes a lot of pattern recognition, complicated maths, understanding the bigger picture, deploying those things. And these are skill sets that are rarely found in one people. And one of the peoples that you would generally find very suitable for this position are people who fall in the ADHD spectrum, or people who are a little different from others, of Asperger's syndrome, or other people who generally are very unique. They don't really have lives like everyone else, and this is why a big the topic in data science hiring now is neurodiversity. So that means,
Mhm.
companies, for example, Microsoft, I know for sure, is making people from the neurodiverse backgrounds to come and work for Microsoft at their own pace in their own settings, and find out the insight that other people wouldn't be doing. For example, a lot of other people, I believe it was Einstein who was also neurodiverse, and in a lot of ways he was different from everyone else, and it certainly takes some kind of craziness to be able to be good at your work. And for other people that might seem awkward, but for a certain job it might be the best thing that ever happened. So if you could only connect people who are uniquely suited for the position, I think world would be in a very good place. For example, in US we
Mhm.
have got something called gifted student program, and
Mhm.
then you can realize this gift very early in life. So if you did that in schools, for example, in Scandinavia, after high school, you have to do one of those tests to find out what your natural temperament is and what kind of program that you want to be studying in.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, in Eastern cultures, it's kind of did more by parents than
Right.
by what you really want to do. Sometimes influenced by the economic needs, but generally, when people are aligned from their natural gifts to what they can do best, then the life becomes a lot more better than what it could be. For example, one of the phenomena in psychology is called savant phenomena. So there's one person who's really disabled in all of their faculties in life and need probably someone else's help to get them function. But one of the gifts actually amplifies so much that it becomes a unique talent. So one of the movies that you probably have seen called The Rain Man, which was a huge blockbuster on the topic. And one of those guys, I don't remember the name. His gift was if you put him on a chopper and you fly him over any landscape on any city in the world, he would just come down and by a memory, he's going to paint the whole landscape in one go. And that's kind of unbelievable that there's one gift that has amplified so much that for a person who really needs someone else's help to even function in life can be doing something like this, and most people wouldn't actually expect them to do that. But if you could only find people like this who are very good at their jobs, at one skill that they excel at, then I think Word would be a really better place. And for that to happen, we actually have to think data science not only from the perspective of numbers and coding and pipelines, but also from the perspective of passion and kindness and societal behavior, and how we can actually map that through some kind of mathematical function.
Right. Yeah. So like one of the article I've written on Medium blog post explores the idea of Ikigai, like the purpose you're calling. Do you have any perspective about how personality tests, how that ties into the Ikigai, and how we could figure out our life's purpose from such metric? Is that possible?
Glad you asked. I had the distinct pleasure to talk to Ganesh Kasari, who is the chief data scientist at Gramener, a very good company, a US-based analytics
Hmm.
company, and we had a lot of conversations around this topic. And he has actually, for the past 4 years, collected 120,000 data points of his personal life to the
Hmm.
15-minute timeline. So he has so much data points about his own life, what he's been doing, what he's thinking, what he's feeling, what he wants to be. And I think when you put this information into some kind of neural networks, you're bound to find out some kind of behaviors if you already don't know about that. But if you were to put that into a neural network to find out if there are any patterns, you would certainly find out a common theme in everyone's life. Um, it could be a desire for fame or for knowledge or for cars or for food, for anything. So there, everyone has this one gift that that remains unexplored unless they really take out the time and sit down and think about the Ikigai. And I really like this concept in the blog post that you wrote, that without this calling you cannot actually reach the pinnacle or the mastery of the subject that you're pursuing, because for most people jobs are 9 to 5, but for people with an Ikigai, they can actually spend the rest of their lives in this flow state where they're continuously chasing this Ikigai. And you won't be able to make a lot of data science videos without being passionate about this. I won't be able to do my work unless I'm passionate about understanding people and genuinely find out ways to help them out in navigating the labyrinths of their own psychology. So, for example, if you're talking to someone who is stuck in their career paths, maybe they're not asking the right questions, then you can probably ask them the right questions because you're asking them objective question from a third person's perspective, and that's so valuable for them. And this is so informative and enriching that you can actually help people that based on the data driven facts, that if they were to do that for the rest of their lives, they're going to make wonderful decisions about about themselves and people around them, and in the end, that's going to make whole society a lot better than it already is.
Right. Yeah. So let's see. Yeah, so we explored a lot of topics related to personality and how that ties into business as well as personal development. Can we maybe take a back look into like the tech stack that you're using currently in your research or your work? Like what kind of programming language or which kind of tools are you using in your everyday research or data science work?
Well, a lot of that depends actually on the clients that we're working with, because we certainly, if
Mm,
they're working on an auto ML platform, we certainly have to use that platform to be able to, load the data and then create new pipelines based on behavioral
mhm,
psychology. But if you were to if we were given a free hand, we generally want to use diverse tools and find out which would actually generate more results with less monitoring and quickest time. So, for
mhm,
example, if you were to do everything from the scratch, then you would probably use Python, but that's probably not a very good idea. Once if you have already the tools like Fast or the AI API for deep learning, or then you could
mhm,
use PyTorch or
mhm,
TensorFlow, and based on what the company that we're working with will prefer. On the academic side, we certainly R is the dominating language in the sphere. We actually use that, but we found out that R is kind of limiting in many general purposes. And if you look at the pricing structure for the server product, which now they call Workbench. It's probably for the medium and large enterprises, and some of the features are really good, but a lot of documentation the Python community has, it certainly doesn't have that. And it's kind of a big bone of contention between those two fans. Also, R or Python is kind of the eternal question out there on the forums. But we use it based on what we are working with and what kind of tech stack our clients have. For our personal projects, it's really based on the kind of work we were doing. And if we can use libraries that would save us a lot of time, we would definitely use that. But otherwise, we'll have to do it from scratch.
Awesome. Yeah. So another topic would be how do you learn a new topic in either in data science or in psychology? How do you leverage like the knowledge that you have to figure out like what's the optimal way to learn? Like, is there anything related to like the time of the day or uh, your state, like flow states, or any such recommendations? Like learning
That's
how to
actually
learn. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. And I was thinking about a couple of days ago. And I was invited in an IEEE student seminar where they wanted to know
Right.
about data science and their careers. And while I was talking, I noticed that one of the things that I found with data science, machine learning, and AI courses, that
Mhm.
90% of them, they missed the point that why and how people actually learn. I mean, they're very good with maths and all of these courses. I really like them, but they're
Mhm.
so focused on maths and differential equations and geometry, and gradient descent and these complicated terms that they forget one bigger picture. And I think one of the person who highlighted this point, and I deeply admire his work, and I certainly recommend that everyone who's learning data science or deep learning should go there and learn from that, is Jeremy Howard. And
Mhm.
his work with faster AI is extremely phenomenal. And he talked about one of um, in one of his early lectures with Rachel, and he recommended a book, which is, I forgot the name. It's from a very famous Harvard writer, and he talks about the fact that when you are teaching someone something, most people start from the bottom. So you first have to learn statistics. For example, let's talk about data science. You first learn statistics, and then you learn calculus, on mathematics, basic mathematics, algebra, how to code. First, you start doing some introduction courses for Python or R, and then build based on that you can try to tackle harder problems implementing the libraries, or the projects that already been done, and then you get to the point why how would we actually apply that in a business setting. Now, this writer, and Jeremy talks about him with great pleasure, that you have to invert the pyramid in order to make learning fun for people. And I try to do this in my undergraduate classes, and for that I get like raving reviews. But I didn't know that there was someone actually talked about it already, which is instead of giving people the hardest problem first, tell them the bigger picture. And the bigger
Mhm.
picture is that how data science, AI, and machine learning is changing the world. And for example, it's my naive attempt to actually give you an example of how that works. Instead of telling people about differential calculus, tell them about the self-driving cars and how autonomous vehicles are better for society, because that would minimize the rate of human driver accidents a lot more, in a more efficient way than any other technology. It's also good for environment because the combustion engines are not good. So our reliance on fossil fuels is not good for our environment. And certainly we have climate concerns. And once you talk about these things, and then you talk about how do you actually achieve these goals, and then you come down and you tell them, for that you have to use the AI, data science, and machine learning algorithms to be able to give this capability to self-driving cars, to find out the optimal distance from the other objects. And when you tell them about other objects like a person or a sidewalk or a tree or an animal, or a pike or something, then you tell them how does it actually a machine. machines do that. So they have later sensors, they have cameras. They calculate the distance between two objects, and then feed that in a central neural network, which makes a decision if you should brake or if you should keep going, how to change lanes. How does it actually start? Now you see, now you've gotten people ready and in the mood, in the flow state, to understand what the bigger picture is and how they're going to be contributing in a larger problem.
Mhm.
Um, in human lives. And once they're so excited about that, then they can start going down and tell about math. And this is exactly the kind of philosophy that he uses in his own Fast AI
Mhm.
course. And certainly the API itself is wonderful. So this is what I believe, that when you are working on a problem, instead of telling people um, to learn something the hard way, get them excited about the subject itself, and then create meaning for them in their life, and have fun with them, joke with them, tell them if you don't understand that, it's fine. You're going to do that over time. And this is probably, we learned the subjects also, there have been lots of failures and frustrations, and some kind of breaks in between, also like a month or two, where you completely forget about that, and I say, okay, this is not worth it. And then you come back and you have this grit, and you start working about, and you're working around the problem that you have, and you keep going. So instead of focusing on what to learn, focus on how to learn. So I think the psychology behind learning things is more important than learning a specific thing, because if you crack the code of how do you learn things, then everything is achievable. But if you're focusing on learning Python, then, or you simply memorize that through rote memory or things like this, you're probably going to be able to replicate the projects already made, but that's not going to help you innovate, because you don't understand things from the core. You're
Right.
understanding it from
Mhm.
the rote memory.
Mm.
And that's not what you want. I mean, you're going to probably land a job, but do you really want this job, or do you want to be stuck in that dead end job for the rest of your life because you never liked it? It's just because you memorize the code and you reproduce that, and then you learn new things and new jobs. Certainly not a fascinating prospect of a job for me, at least. From a
Mhm.
psychological point of how do you learn things? So what you do is this kind of the Aristotelian principle of breaking the bigger things into smaller tasks. So you break things down in smaller steps. You do it one by one, and you see the whole picture, that how the whole picture is making sense, and then what components would actually be needed for you to actually get from point A to the point B. And
Mhm.
that's generally how systems and codes work also. So you have functions, and then you embed that in one bigger function, and then you do these abstraction layers, and finally you have a product. And when you're debugging your code and finding out where the problem is, you just go to one specific code function, and then you fix those things, and make sure that all of these interact with each other in a systemic way, and everything's fine. So this is exactly the same principle human brain works as well. You have to break things down in smaller achievable goals, and then at
Mhm.
some point you have to put everything together, and everything is achievable. People have done remarkable feats in life, because they have this grit to be able to
Mhm.
go through these smaller steps and break immense projects. For example, think about Egyptian pyramids. It doesn't look like people can actually do a wonder like that, but then people eventually did, because they broke a huge project into small chunks, one at a time. Bring one stone at a position. Put other stones in the vicinity, and finally make layers and layers and layers on top, unless you're done. And now we are living to actually see that. So nothing is
Right.
impossible if you actually crack the
Mhm.
code.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So yeah, let's see. We explored a lot of topics, and let me see if we could have probably a more machine learning topic uh, that I would like to ask is, what's your favorite machine learning algorithm?
Oh, that's hands down rainforest. Random forest, sorry.
All
Rainforest.
right.
Because it generally it works very well with a lot of problems, because these classification algorithms, their leaf structure is very similar to how human brain works. So you have a set of options, and you assign probabilities of those outputs happening, and then at some point you have more data, and you substantiate your decisions with more and more data. And at some point, there's a terminal leaf where you find out, okay, in that specific given situation, this is probably the uh, most probable outcome of the situation. Just like in a binary classification problem, you have a yes or no, or the probability of log probability of the disease happening or not happening. This is exactly how human brain works. Also, if you're given a task to do, for example, if you want to get from your house to your workplace, there are multiple options to do that. You can take a train, you can walk there, you can take a flight there if you wanted to. But in many ways, you simply have there are a lot of other options. There are options to choose from, but you assign the probability of all of these things happening with the shortest time, with the less ease, less hardship, and minimal cost. And then you assign these probabilities to these decisions, and then you at some point will find out the best probability of the best situation. And this is in information sciences, we call it the decision support systems. So once you have the different probabilities, you will find out the best options. You will actually do that. And on a larger scale, everything human beings do, you can assign these probabilities. So in big companies, let's put that in a real life example for Facebook, or Amazon or Twitter, to the recommendation systems. So the base of that is something called graph learning. So what you do is that you use user IDs and entities and their behavior over time, their interactions on the website, make a very complicated network diagram of these entities interacting with each other. And based on that, you actually recommend your customers the products or services that previous customers of their cluster have chosen or shown interest in. And based on that, they get a lot of sales that wouldn't have happened if there were no recommendations to be furnished. Same principle works in Netflix. Once you have a lot of information about people, the kind of choices that they make when it comes to movies and shows, it gives you the recommendations that are more likely for going to result in higher watch time. And once you optimize those metrics for a long time, it becomes so sophisticated that it knows you better than yourself. So I talked about a famous paper with the collaboration of Facebook and Cornell, in which to talk about the fact that your activity on Facebook, your Facebook page likes, are very correlated with the knowledge of yourself. For example, with 150 likes, your coworkers know you better than. Let me phrase it. I think I'm just forgetting that. So Facebook knows you better than your coworker if they know 150 likes from you and where you actually make. Upon 300 likes, they know you better than your spouse. And with 500, I'm sorry, better than your spouse. And then with 500 likes, they know you better than your spouse. And that is extremely insightful research, because if you're able to measure and grasp the relationship between different entities based on likes, then it certainly is telling of the fact that what else is possible if they were to align the things that you were more likely to be liking. And this is why it's very important that when you use an algorithm, you make sure that it's going to give you the optimal results based on your expected metric. So if that's the watch time, then you have to find some kind of correlation between the the movies or the tracks or the YouTube videos that are famous or trending in people that you in a cluster that you're part of. So it really depends. For example, if there are nonlinear relationships between the data, then you're going to use something some form of neural networks based on graph learning. So what neural networks do is they can continuously update their weights and biases through back propagation to find out if the choices that you're making align with some kind of correlation that the network already knows. And over time, this model becomes so good at what you're doing is that it's going to give you exactly the kind of results that you're looking for. So for example, when you go to the YouTube page and you see the recommendations, they're very good at pinpointing the next episode of the series that you were actually watching, or the new IMDb trailer, or the podcast episode that you were interested in as soon as it releases, because it already knows that the watch time on this previous episode of the podcast was so high that you're going to be interested in watching the next episode. And this is why, people have so much subscribers and people have watch time, because as soon as the episode is released, it pops in front of you. And then
Mm.
how mathematically that happens in the back end, is what I'm telling you. So they use complicated neural networks, reinforcement learning, graph learning, to find out what would be the best way to keep you on the platform.
Awesome. Yeah, so it's been a very exciting podcast today, and I'm very impressed on your broad knowledge of data science, psychology, business, academia, and research. And like before we end the podcast, would you like to tell us how we could find more about you, how we can find out about your website, your YouTube channel, or your podcast as well?
Thank you so much, Shanine. It's always been a pleasure collaborating with you and talking about cutting edge things in the field that are coming from you or from anyone else. You can certainly connect with me on LinkedIn. I hope you can put a link in the description. I also have a podcast on YouTube
Mhm.
where I invite people around the world to talk about these things. So, do follow my channel for the new podcast. I do share my research on LinkedIn as well. You can find a lot of what I've talked about on my research gate, where I publish papers and manuscripts. I think that's pretty much where you can connect with me.
Awesome. All right. So all of these information will be provided in the video description. And so, yeah, thank you very much for being on the podcast, and have a great one.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.